Hello and welcome. I have a great conversation to share with you today with Mark Walsh, the founder of the phenomenally successful Embodiment Unlimited. We delve into some fascinating topics around embodiment, including cultural reasons why people may become disconnected from their bodies, plus current and future trends in body-focused practices, and the impact of AI and the Metaverse. Mark makes a bold prediction that there may be some conflict between virtuals and fleshies. I'll leave you to watch the rest of this fun but serious interview to see what he means, and please remember to subscribe to the Inner Sense YouTube channel for more information about how your bodily signals and feelings impact your health and well-being. Thank you very much. Morning, Mark. Thanks so much for joining. And I'd like to start off by finding a little bit more about your background and how you ended up creating Embodiment Unlimited.
Yeah, hi, Ian. So I guess I was a cognitive child, like very clever, read my way through the library. You know, people said, did IQ tests, and I have top 0.1%. And at school was kind of easy for me academically, but not necessarily personally. You know, I struggled with authority. I struggled drug and alcohol issues quite early. Relationally, I struggled. And when I got to university, I thought, everyone's telling me I'm clever, but I'm miserable. And I'm actually suicidal and alcoholic at this point. You know, I'm 18 years old. And I thought, well, there's got to be something else. There's got to be another way to get smart, what someone now might call multiple intelligences or something like that. Mm-hmm. I just got intuited there was something going on there. And so I didn't actually go in the library for the first year of university because I thought there's no answers in there. But I did start studying martial arts. I was moved to a big city. It was a bit bigger, a bit more dangerous. I was like, you know what, this is a good idea. And, I was doing martial arts and just loved it. And they were asking me, to feel my body. And I was sort of like, well, why? Or, what body? And I remember one of my teachers being like, okay, well, how are you emotionally? And I'm fine. Like, yeah, but how are you? And I'm like, I don't know. I realized I was pretty cut off from myself. So I started studying first martial arts, like Aikido, then a lot of the other mind-body disciplines, meditation, conscious dance, yoga, et cetera, and just eventually just made that my life. Loved that. And then I started, of course, at a certain point, this is 25 years ago, right? So at a certain point, I started teaching other people. And my company and the work I do came out of there. And it's been through different audiences, NGOs, war zones, corporate. Now I train a lot of coaches, a lot of yoga teachers. And I've sort of become, I guess, the person most associated with the word embodiment, which has a lot to do with the stuff you study. So, as soon as I saw this invitation, I was like, yeah, no problem, let's talk.
You've really achieved great things within Embodiment Unlimited and brought together a big range of people. So I really admire what you've achieved. But for people who are new to maybe both of our types of work, what does embodiment mean to you? I hear different therapists using different words, and I think we're talking about similar things. But for you, what does embodiment mean?
Yeah, it's really worth defining terms. I wrote several books on it, and chapter 1 of the first book is what is embodiment, and I find there's actually several answers that's best to give. It's in different fields, and scientifically it'll be used one way in, say, robotics, and another way in sociology. Anthropology uses it another way. So it's worth defining. One way of thinking about it is the subjective study of the body. So we can think of the body as an object, as a thing, as an it. This is a pen. It's not, unless I'm pretty schizophrenic, I'm not going to start having a conversation with it. Whereas the body is also part of who we are. So if someone were to lose their arm, for example, they would intuitively have a sense they'd lost something personal, much more than if you lost a pen. That is, when we see someone, we have a sense that their embodiment, it doesn't mean their height or their weight or how muscular they are, but how they are in the body. Like that's another way of saying it more poetically, how we are. That is an aspect of who they are. Yeah, who they are is partly determined that way. And of course, there's situational factors here. Sometimes it's just body language, someone's crossing their arms, they're cold, or a certain situation makes them look a certain way. But we do have an unconscious embodiment, which is a set of habits that hold us together. Mm-hmm. Right. And we get this when we meet someone like I was doing job interviews today. And people come across a certain way. And I'm like, okay, I could be getting this wrong, but there's a certain person that I'm seeing here. And if I'm, employing someone, that's important. This is how we fall in love. We don't fall in love by doing the data on an Excel spreadsheet. We talk chemistry when we call about love, right? That's an embodied attraction, an embodied resonance. Children are good at this. Dogs are good at this. Dog knows if it's the boss or you're the boss. And that's embodiment. Child knows if you're safe or not. They can feel it. Right? I've worked with a lot of kids, and kids are great at picking up on this stuff. But something gets lost along the way. And that's why, another definition of embodiment would be the umbrella term for all the body-mind arts. It's all the things I study, all the things I love. So often I just start there because what they have in common, they're all about the body, but they're also all about awareness. So there's things that are about the body, but not awareness. That's exercise, for example. You can do some pull-ups and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But it's not embodiment if you're just working on your muscle. You're not working on yourself. Whereas in the martial arts, traditionally, yoga, you're developing yourself. You're bringing body awareness as being key. So, it's a long answer, but I find unless I hit it from a few angles, people often misunderstand it. And, sometimes I'll even get poetic answers like, it's the body as a verb, not as a noun. And, that is kind of philosophical at this point, right? The last way I'd say is just a skill set. So this is where we could say I didn't have certain skills when I was 17. Body awareness is one, but then there's others like self-regulation. Mm-hmm. Right, like today, I haven't slept very much. I had a difficult morning. So I'm going, okay, I'm doing an interview. I want to regulate myself a little bit here. But then there's also expression, can I express myself through my body, like a good actor or a good, just a child, being able to fully express themselves. Kids are good at expression, not regulation normally. And then we've got empathy, leadership, areas that my business clients are interested in, my coaching clients. So we can think of it as 4 skill sets, really. Like, in my books, I really break that down. Like it's not anything esoteric. These are skills you can learn.
I really like that it's, it is an umbrella term for lots of different practices. But one of the key things is to bring awareness to it. And, what you said, where you start, what started with martial arts, I think that's martial arts. We can't generalize to all the martial arts, but many of them, I feel that is the difference between going to the gym and, as you said, doing pull-ups or lifting weights. Is not only have you got your attention on, the weights or the things in the outside world, but you've also got your attention turned inwards to a certain extent. So that's brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that. So could you maybe? So I hear that when you had this breakthrough moment that was triggered at university learning martial arts, that you've benefited in so many ways. But can you say a little bit more about where what coming home to your body, how that's helped you?
I'll give a few stories once. And the difference between being cut off from yourself and not, right? Mm-hmm. So one of those would be, what do I want to do? What are my values? What do I care about? Like, that's our radar. Yeah. In the same way as it's our radar when we meet that girl or boy who lights us up, when we do that job and go, wow, that was really, this is what I should be doing. I did a piece of work in Cyprus with the United Nations. This was another turning point for me. And it was an Aikido-based peace project, believe it or not, with different people from warring countries, Greeks and Turks, Israelis, Palestinians. And I just had this really strong felt sense in my body of rightness, like I was in the right place, and same thing when I met my wife, very similar feeling. That's our body telling us what matters. And then we could also, that's one skill, right? Tuning into ourselves in terms of values, skill sets. I wasn't taught, I'm a British bloke from a working class farm village. I wasn't taught emotional intelligence. Like my dad dealt with his issues through drinking. And I almost went down that road. And then I was like, okay, there's other ways to do this. I can calm myself down in yoga or meditation. I can express myself and talk about my difficulties. I can notice what's going on for me emotionally. There's a whole skill set there that I just wasn't educated in. I'm just giving a few examples. Maybe let's take one more. I run a company. I employ 25 people. I've been the leader of events, big and small. I think the biggest one was 500,000 people, the Embodiment Conference about a year ago. And I was essentially like in charge of a country the size of Luxembourg for a few weeks. And you better have some embodiment if you're a leader. You better have some presence, some gravitas, some empathy for people you work with. These are all embodied capacities. Empathy is not cognitive. this theory of mind, which is cognitive, right? Which is like, okay, so Ian's doing the interview. He's probably hoping I say something interesting to his audience. I can do that cognitively, but resonance, empathy is embodied skill. And these things are not taught generally. They can be, and they can be improved if we have practices, which is the key thing that our culture doesn't get, is practices. Like I've got a lot of books behind me here and behind that screen. None of those will solve your problems. Information won't do it. And, the term academic is now means irrelevant. It's a synonym for irrelevant, which I think is really sad, right? The gymnasium where the Greeks used to do philosophy was not separate from philosophical debate or athletic performance. Our footballers are no longer moral kind of people we'd look up to morally. Generally, there's some I probably would, but generally we wouldn't say, if you want to educate your children about right and wrong and what's good and bad and how you should live as a man or as a human, we generally wouldn't point to the Premiership as the place to learn that. There's been a disconnect.
You've hinted at something there. You said growing up in the UK, we've got this, the British culture's got this kind of stiff upper lip and we don't talk about it. So I can see from, I also live in the UK, there's a kind of attitude that we have about expressing and understanding our emotions. It's kind of brushed them under the carpet or pushed them to one side. But do you think there are any other more sort of global cultural reasons why people have become out of touch with bodily sensations throughout history?
Yeah. I mean, the cultural piece I'm fascinated by. My wife's Ukrainian. I'm from an Irish immigrant family. I've lived in 6 countries. So we shouldn't underestimate the cultural piece. I'm talking to my Italian colleague next, and we always joke, I feel but don't express, and he expresses but doesn't feel, which there was actually a piece of research on that cross-culturally. So there is a cultural piece. However, what's universal? One lovely thing about embodiment is it is what's universal, actually. Is it's what we share. We share a body. We share breath. We share, look at babies. They have a certain posture, a certain way of breathing. Cross-culturally before that gets enculturated. And I think it is one of the things that connects us across dividing lines. Shared history, you could go back as far as agriculture. Some people would say, certainly the Industrial Revolution, where the model was the human being as machine, so that sort of something was lost there. And if you look at countries like, I was just in Portugal for a month, and they had the Industrial Revolution much later, and you can kind of feel it. It's made a difference to the culture. And then we have the information age. It's harder to be embodied while on your mobile phone. It's possible, but it's a hell of a challenge, And, now we've got modern things on top of that, trends towards transhumanism, and you can identify as anything you want to be. It doesn't matter what your body is. And, let's all upload ourselves to the Metaverse as quickly as possible. So this is, I would say, there's various trends. And if we were to look at it politically, we can say, well, anyone with power doesn't really want you to be in touch with yourself, right? Like advertisers, priests back in the day, maybe kings, corporate overlords, whoever the latest, ruling class are, whether they be corporate or spiritual or religious or whatever, they want to be the middleman. They want to tell you what's important. An advert doesn't say, hey, tune in to whether you really want this product. It says you want this product, right? Like somebody who's powerful says, hey, you should sacrifice your life for this idea, rather than, hang on, do you actually believe in that?
I can tell you've been thinking and contemplating about this for a long time. You've drawn together lots of different insights there in a way that I haven't heard anyone explain it before. So thank you so much. And I wonder if you've got any thoughts about some kind of whisperings I've heard from lots of different people studying consciousness and AI and so on. I see some optimism ahead in many ways. The kind of conclusions that a lot of the consciousness researchers are coming to and AI researchers is that, that we have cognitive thoughts and conscious experience because of our living bodies. I know Anil Seth, I don't know if you've heard of him, his new book, Being You. One of the main quotes from that is, conscious experiences are all controlled hallucinations, but they happen because of our living bodies. And there's another guy who's Antonio Damasio, who's
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah, it's a bit more than that. Yeah, I
knowing,
mean,
feeling and knowing. And then, the AI researchers are sort of being told, advised by the neuroscientists, that if you're going to try and endow a machine with more emotional intelligence, then you need to give it a body. So I've got this sense that it's going to come full circle. Do you have that sort of optimism, or?
yeah, I mean, basically everybody's been working from a mistaken paradigm. So from the body-mind split, they've been working from this idea. Let's go out through science fiction. So I love science fiction. And, often there's like, you can upload someone to a computer. There's a great Johnny Depp film where this happens, a kind of recent one, but it's an old idea, the brain in the jar or whatever. But you can't, if you had a brain in a jar, it wouldn't be the person because the body's missing. And actually their nervous system is spread all out over their body. It's not just their brain, it's spread the heart and the gut and the rest of the body. And it's not just the nervous system, it's the hormonal system. Anyone that's had a hormonal change for whatever reason, whether it be in life or in the cycle or, whatever, different reasons for hormone change, will realize that affects you quite profoundly. So you are your biochemistry, you are your body on one level. And this idea that we're somehow separate from that is kind of a Judeo-Christian idea, really, that the body is more Christian than Judeo, that the body is sinful and is something to get away from. And there was a split historically where the church said, okay, we do spirit, and that became mind, but you get to do body, and they kind of split. So this is our department. And what that meant was that anyone even starting robotics research or IO research was coming from a completely silly assumption that those things are separate. So you can't upload someone to a computer. That's not possible. Okay, you can simulate someone's behavior with a complex computer program, but that's not the same thing. I think no one understands what consciousness is. I certainly don't. But it does seem like the body is deeply, deeply involved. And I have seen kind of people in robotics, for example, being like, oh, we need to get this, creature more embodied if it's going to be more like human. So I have seen that trend as well. Almost no one working in the sort of geeky computer sciences that I think really understands embodiment subjectively. So they're coming, it's like a whole load of virgins trying to figure out what sex is. It's sort of bizarre. So, I have a sort of slight smile on my face when I see some of the stuff that comes from that world.
My story is very similar to yours in terms of adolescence and going to university and plunging into some sort of mood that I needed a way out, and it was the body that brought me out. So, I'm completely with you on the importance of the body and what it does. However, I still like to remind myself sometimes of that I'm not, just because it's my experience doesn't mean that it's everyone else's experience. So if I was to ask you what piece of evidence outside of your own experience that supports the benefits of people staying connected to their body, what would that be?
Okay, so let's look at what counts as evidence, right? So this idea that anything subjective is invalid is basically what you kind of expressed, or is valid to a very limited degree, right? So I think that is a problem with our culture generally, that's its starting point. And it's also the beauty of our culture that it says, hey, you think that the sun is pulled around the sky by chariots with Odin leading them or something, prove it, show me the data, show me the facts. I'm a business person. I'm always like, show me the numbers, show me the evidence, right? So I think there's sort of two positions here. And I think one subjective experience isn't invalid, but how do we check subjective experience? Well, by a self-report. Mm-hmm. So, I've worked with tens of thousands of students. So this isn't just what I feel. I think the other thing there is we don't jump domains. So I can't say, I feel my arms are warm, therefore I have key energy flowing down them, right? That's a jump from the domain of the subjective to the objective. So we should be careful which we're making claims about and not to jump between the two or use metaphor to jump between the two, which is something a lot of, say, Chinese martial arts teachers are an absolute nightmare for example. So a little bit on what would that be called, metaphysics or the epistemology. So looking at what counts as truth. However, there are lots of studies. There are now lots of studies. Mindfulness is the basis of embodiment. There's lots and lots of studies on that. There are lots and lots of studies on how posture impacts us. There are lots and lots of studies on all sorts of impacts of self-regulation or the health benefits of people learning yoga, or what happens physiologically when people, and for example, there's techniques I can do, and I can strap on a heart pulse rate monitor or a brainwave thing, which I do. I own those, and we just go, look, the brainwave's changed. Look, the pulse rate changed. So even though I might subjectively be doing a technique, it will show up objectively in various measures, whether they be immediate, like a reduced pulse rate, for example, or different brain waves, or long-term studies in terms of health outcomes or leadership outcomes or whatever it is. Long answer, but I hope that was satisfying in a way.
A long answer, but an excellent answer. Thank you. And so what you've told me is that there's lots of evidence, and I'd agree with that. One thing I would like to pick up on what you mentioned there about mindfulness practices, and that you said they're the sort of the basis for embodiment. I often get asked when people start learning about the way that we talk about embodiment, which is through interoception. What's the difference between mindfulness and what we do? So, again, it's a little bit of semantics here, but could you sort of explain? I've seen in your, I downloaded the free chapter of your book. I'll buy the full book soon, but it says you introduced this term called bodyfulness, which I've heard another guy, Zevi Slavin, first.
Sarah Christine Caldwell, there's several of us independently invented it, I think, actually. Yeah, heartfulness. So first of all, that's also a translation from the Pali. So I'm a fairly, I'm a practiced Buddhist practitioner of some years. And there's a Pali was the language of the Buddhist canon, like the Buddhist Bible, if you will. And what's called sati is usually translated as mindfulness, but that's an English word. It's actually a Victorian word. So it emphasizes mindfulness. Yeah, you could just translate that differently because it is a very select thing. It's not quite the same as just paying attention, which is what most people think of it as. It is a little bit more to it than that. So it's not a great translation, and a great translation would take a lot more explanation. So it's the one we've got. It will do. Things like bodyfulness or heartfulness are equally as valid as a translation. Simple answer, difference between mindfulness and embodiment. I usually say mindfulness is awareness, embodiment is also choice. Okay. So in mindfulness, we're generally just paying attention. It's a certain kind of attention, as I said, so it's a bit more complex than that. There's a filtering, there's a quality of loving attention even. I dare one say that in the modern context. However, in embodiment, we're also trying to impact ourselves. We're trying to change ourselves. Though that is also true of, say, the Buddhist endeavor long term. You're trying to have a fairly significant change called enlightenment, right? So there is a potential there for change. And techniques like metta bhavana or heart practices of Buddhism, the Brahma Viharas, would also involve a leaning into the positive, one might say, or an emotional development. But generally, I'd say mindfulness, being aware of something, embodiment, choice. And it also depends if we're talking about conscious or unconscious embodiment. So anyone you meet has an unconscious embodiment, but that doesn't mean they're mindful. Mm-hmm. Now, if they're mindful and they're deliberately developing themselves through the body, then they have a conscious embodiment. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? So all of us are embodied in a certain way, as the common use of the word would suggest.
So that for an unconscious embodiment, that might be someone who, let's say, who's got a fear of spiders, and they're having this knee-jerk reaction whenever they walk into a room and they see a spider, then they're unconscious, or they're...
Well, we're all conditioned, but it's more than that. It's everyone's personality. It's everyone's cultural. So we can think of embodiment in layers, right? Like right now, you've got a personality which has a history. Mm-hmm. Now, if the adaptation of your history was, I have to be really nice to everyone because that's how I find safety. This is a trauma pattern, right? But it becomes a personality trait. I've got lots of friends like that. That might be a cultural pattern. English women do that more than English men, and English men do it more than Russian men, a hell of a lot more. So there's cultural adaptations, cultural patterns, and that will be very different than if your adaptation to life was something like, have to be tough and strong and aggressive in order to be safe. Mm-hmm. And that is not a cognitive thing. That's laid down in your posture, your breathing patterns. I have slightly more of the aggressive patterns. You can see like musculature in my jaw. I'll lean forwards a lot more. I'm quite fast. There's a certain way of being there, and I can develop that. I can change that. I can add more range. You generally don't really change your personality, but you will take some of the edges, soften some of the edges, and add a few more possibilities with embodied practice. I think character is a good word because it's not quite permanent, but it's not something you can just, like state, you can just change. If this was vodka, I'd change my state very quickly. Mm-hmm. If I jumped up and down, I'd change my state very quickly. Mm-hmm. But states don't change traits. And embodiment refers to both. Mindfulness is mostly working with states. So it's how am I right now? Embodiment is how am I right now and how am I as a person? And you can't feel that. So the example I say is like the taste of your own mouth. Or I get people to cross their arms and then cross them the other way if anyone wants to try that. And you don't feel, it's just normal. It's like your underpants. They're just there. You're habituated to it. So embodiment includes the mindful, but also includes that which you cannot feel.
Interesting. So it includes, and how does it include, if you can't feel it and you're not aware of it because of whatever reason, it's been put into the autopilot part of your behavior. So how does embodiment access that? Is it through other people? Is it through reflection on other people?
2 or 3 ways. One would be feedback. So for example, I could say, hey, Ian, can I take on your posture and show you it? And for example, you head tilt quite a lot, right? I could like show that to you and you might not have been aware that you head tilt. Some people very straight, some people like counselors. Yeah. You just do it a little bit compared to some. So I didn't ask your permission there, but it's like, that's an example of, a very small thing that I would do. And then we could investigate that. Or you could just contrast it rather than tell you. I could say, put your head straight, put your head to the side. And I'm giving a very concrete example. And then, okay, which of those is more familiar? And you could try a range, right? And okay, but it might be, well, it depends on the context. Okay, great. So when do you do this? When do you do that? And build awareness of that pattern through a kind of contrast. And if the head tilt doesn't sound very, very important, we could, I pick something sort of quite objective and simple. We could contrast between being nice and being aggressive, like to use that example before, right? And then one of them, you'd just be like, I don't want to do this. And the other one, you'd be like trying on old shoes. You'll be like, no, this is familiar. So you don't feel the one that's familiar, but you feel the difference between the one that isn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And the head tilt does sound important. I work as a manual therapist as well. So, I see the links between head tilts and aggression and, all these things.
Yeah, there's physical things, there's emotional things, there's all sorts. I just picked one that I could see that was kind of easy, but it's like, if you were my coachee, we could go into that for like an hour. We could play with that. And what does it mean? Where does it come from? How does that serve you? How does it not serve you? What's the emotional tone? We could start with something simple, or someone does something with their mouth, or tightening your eyes. Like, people can try this at home. Like, the world looks real different when your eyes are tight than when you have nice, relaxed peripheral vision, or when your belly's soft and when your belly's tight, or, if your mouth's like this, so I call this Karen mouth. I'm upset. Yeah. As opposed to when your mouth's relaxed and open, or like I'm going to Brazil in a few weeks. Like, you see a lot of like succulent, juicy, wet, soft, open mouths in Brazil that you just don't see. I'm not saying anything that correlates with, but use your imagination. Well, and that does, you don't see that so much in Northern Europe. So I distract you with the Brazilian imagery.
Well, a little bit.
See you going up on that's good. So it's perfectly natural.
What I was being distracted, but also I was thinking about this Lisa Barrett's work on constructed emotion, and she argues that emotions aren't expressed universally. That a lot of it is cultural.
That's not true.
That's not true.
It's just not true. I mean, there are cultural variables of gestures. For example, Italians use different hand gestures. Or in Ethiopia, where I used to live, they'll do this when they're listening. But you can tell when an Ethiopian's upset or angry. You can tell when a baby's happy or not. That's not. You give a happy baby to anyone in the world, they'll tell you it's a happy baby. I think there are some pretty strong universals that, having lived pretty widely cross-culturally, the gesture stuff's just on the surface. That is different.
Okay. Well, yeah, maybe there's a, something in our the semantics of gesture versus expressing emotion, which, and they do blur. I believe they do blur, and some people can inhibit what they're feeling by giving a different gesture, I suppose, or mask what they're feeling.
Definitely do that.
Yeah. What direction do you see the whole movement? So you've got your Embodiment Unlimited, which is as you said, you've reached all around the world with that. But then we've got other similar sort of movements, the somatics and so on. Where do you see that heading? What do you hope that it will achieve during the next few years?
All right. So there's a few possibilities. Certainly the last few years have been interesting because sort of everyone working much more online, because of circumstances. And this is meant that embodiment practices that were quite obscure are now available to the world. You know, I have teachers on Zoom in California, New York, Berlin, you know, all different places. And so there's a greater availability now, and there's a greater cross-fertilization. And we've, you know, the conference and other things I've done, we've been part of this movement. Somatics, like I think of as a subset of embodiment, like the kind of Western awareness practices you could think of there, Feldenkrais and Alexander and things like that. I see them talking to each other a lot more. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's take trauma therapy, which has been wildly popular in the last 5 years in a way that I couldn't have imagined 20 years ago. It's become like, you know, the trauma people are rock stars. They're hard to get hold of. They charge a lot of money. It's really interesting. Trauma people are really big names for like Gabor Mate or people.
You had him on. I saw you interviewed Gabor Walsh, which I was.
Yeah, I got therapized live by him as part of the Embodiment Conference. It was full on. Gabor's a nice guy. Actually, I like him a lot. He's the real deal. And there's a popularization. I'll give you an example. I was in a breathwork workshop, Wim Hof style breathwork workshop in London last weekend. And a few years ago in that workshop would have been life coaches, yoga teachers, maybe PTs. But this was like computer programmers, finance guys, just like normal people, like a couple of geezers, like Essex geezers. It was just like regular people. And mindfulness has crossed over, yoga's crossed over, breathwork's now crossing over, you know, conscious dance, maybe the next one, you know, martial arts going out of fashion, but it's not weird to do a martial art, I don't think, anymore. So I do see an increasing popularization. I do see the scientists sort of trying to catch up, which is great. You know, people are doing research on this stuff. And as I said, sometimes it's kind of funny because they're not directing it very well because their own lack of personal experience with it. But there are some who have it, and it's, you know, that's great that that's happening. So I see it coming together and I see it popularizing. But there's another movement, which is this sort of stay in your home, be on a computer, don't make social contact with other human beings because it's dangerous. Other people are dangerous. Breath is dangerous. You know, I always say, look, I don't have any opinions on vaccines or pandemics because I'm not qualified. I have no public opinion on any of those things. I have private opinion, no public opinion. But I have quite a strong opinion on co-regulation and embodiment and the fact that we outsource our sanity to each other. Mm-hmm. You know, humans are made to connect physically, and that involves touch and eating together and dancing. And there's been a reduction in all that in the Western world for a long time, and it just accelerated fast. And the idea of the metaverse and, you know, uploading, and as soon as AI porn gets good enough, we're all screwed, you know, or we're all not screwed actually. You know, like that's a worry to me. Like I know how addictive social media is on my phone, let alone virtual reality. So I think there will be a conflict between, let's call them the virtuals and the fleshies. And one of them will have all the money and all the media, and the other one will still have physical force. And I think that is a future civil war. I mean, I'm kind of going off into a little science fiction fantasy now, so I'm not saying this will happen, but I think there's certainly the potential between a very serious conflict between people who want to live in the real world and people who don't. And I wonder where that will go. So that's my futurist musings, none of which should be relied upon for any real accuracy.
Thanks for sharing though, because that, you know, it's definitely stirred up a lot in me when you've said that. I feel sort of, you know, I dip into lots of other people's conversations. I don't know if you're familiar with John Vervaeke, and
I love John. John's a great guy. Yeah.
And Tristan Harris with the Centre for Humane Technology, and that they haven't said it as boldly and as explicitly as you have just now, but I think, you know, there's a lot of people sensing this kind of or they have a concern about the way things could head, but also, as you said, there seems to be this new hunger and this, you know, people giving something like Wim Hof method a go that would have seemed bonkers to them maybe 10 years ago. So
it's much easier for me at a sort of family gathering or party or something now, and people say, what do you do? I say, it's a bit like mindfulness, you know, help people get in their bodies, and they're like, oh yeah, it's good for you, that. Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah. They might not have heard embodiment as a word, like that is trending. But it's as much, you know, articles in the Times about the kind of research you've done, and it's very cool. It's very cool. So we've had these two things heading in different directions. And, you know, one thing I'd say is, you know, to my future fleshy terrorists out there, there's always a plug. There's no matter how online people are, there's always someone that's got to keep the power grid going. And there's always a plug. So I'll just leave that hanging for the future people who are going to need this. You can unplug.
You can unplug. One final question, because I'm aware you're sort of limited on time. So let's say this future civil war, it happens, and then the fleshy embodied people are successful, and we're all fully embodied and endowed with all these skills to communicate and self-regulate and co-regulate in wonderful ways. What then?
Well, it would look a lot like sort of tribal society, but without the ringworm, So I feel like, well-regulated humans do exist. You'll see communities of them. You'll see communities of people who live in community and dance together and eat together. It's not a weird thing. Hippies are always trying to do this, making it, I'm in Portugal, there's a lot of people trying to do it there. And I think bringing that into balance and harmony with technology and having everything in its proper place, I don't mind going on Zoom once a day to talk to you and be interviewed. I just don't want to be on Zoom like 10 hours a day. I'll be walking around the park on my phone calls most of the day. And I think finding that harmony between nature and technology is I think we all know that's needed, right? I think very few people who are so extreme, they'd say we need to go back to sort of Neolithic times, hunter-gatherer society. But I don't think anyone would look at the way technology is heading and say that's healthy. I mean, we are the most mentally ill, suicidal, drug-addicted society that has ever lived. Like literally those three things. I'm not making that up. That's statistical. Like that, we're sending ourselves crazy. We're killing ourselves and we're drug-addicted. I don't think anyone could look at that and say, yeah, that's positive and there's nothing that needs to be done. So this is why so many people are getting, yoga and meditation used to be a luxury. Now it's a necessity to work in London without blowing your brains out, and there's an opportunity in that as well as sort of an irony. And I think it's interesting where things are heading. Ultimately, I just want to do something positive. So I just keep it practical, train coaches, get interviewed, talk about it if I can. Write a few books, I do a podcast if people are interested in that, and just try and put something positive out there. Like the podcast is like 300 hours of free content on this stuff, right? Yeah. So it's like, try and make some networks, connect people, and who knows, maybe, Zuckerberg will get me in a computer and that'll be the end of it. But I certainly won't go down without a fight. And, this fight's a fun one, like my fight this evening is going dancing with my wife for 2 hours. It's not a, it's not a hardship to go dancing with my wife with a group of people that I've known for years.
That speaks volumes, actually, in that the solution really, if I've heard you correctly, is simply to stay embodied. And to stay embodied, you've got a whole host of tools in your toolbox. That seems to be all that's required.
Yeah, you need practices, you need teachers, you need community, and you need nature. So just having a practice won't do it, but with those other things, you'll be right.
Community and nature, yeah. And as you say, there's so much evidence backing that up as well. So, okay, we've been 45 minutes. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wind up?
No, I just think it's cool what you're doing, and I just love that people are interested in this stuff. I love that there's a scientific language, interoception, or I'm glad you didn't ask me any hard science questions, Ian. Thank you. And anyone out there, they want to check it out, Embodiment Unlimited, Google that, on Amazon, Mark Walsh. But basically, if you put embodiment anywhere into the internet, then my pretty face will come up. And if I wasn't your style, there's loads of other great embodiment teachers out there. There's loads of other people I'd recommend in the embodiment space. I don't know, I just emailed Philip Shepherd, for example, who writes books on the environment. There's loads of other great people who train coaches, and there's all sorts of cool stuff happening. So I'm just one flavor of it, and it's a huge movement.
And congratulations again for what you've achieved. So the podcast channel you mentioned, is that on YouTube or is that somewhere else? Where can people find it?
It's on YouTube, it's on iTunes. You'd probably find it elsewhere as well. If you just put in whatever engine you're using, just type embodiment in and something relevant, I'm sure, will come up. So it's pretty sure it's on iTunes as well. So
thanks so much. And I'll put a link to some of those in the video description for this interview.
All right, Ian, thanks for your time, mate. Appreciate it. Good conversation.
Thank you. Take care.